This is Conversations on Careers and Professional Life, a podcast from the Foster School of Business, MBA Career Management Office. I'm your host, Gregory Heller. On each episode, I talk with guests from faculty and staff to students and business leaders about the skills and strategies that can help you design a professional life that you're happy with. On this episode, I speak with Ron Rapatalo. Ron works in executive search, coaching, and men's styling. I'll let Ron explain his career in his own words, but first, a few notes about this episode. Ron lives and works in the New York area, and we talk by web conference. You'll notice the sound quality is a bit different than other episodes. This show is also longer than others. The first half hour, we talk about Ron's non-traditional and non-linear career, and working in the education and nonprofit executive search space. We also talk about the importance of networking and generosity. In the last 20 minutes, we talk about how men can develop a personal style they're comfortable wearing that can work for them professionally. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Ron Rapatalo. So my guest today is Ron Rapatalo. Ron and I actually went to college together, did our undergraduate at NYU, and it's been quite some time since we've actually spoken. But the universe brought us back together both on LinkedIn and in a recent online course that we were taking. And I thought that this would be a great opportunity to have Ron on, given what he does. So because your current set of employment activities seems rather eclectic and interconnected and maybe a little complicated, I'm going to ask you to describe for us what you do now, Ron.
Well, thanks, Gregory. It's good to be on your podcast, and it's great to reconnect. It's funny how the stars often align to get good people back together again. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity today. So let me describe what I do from more of a mountaintop view. So what I'm best at, enjoy doing, is cultivating and building relationships with people. So all of the 4 different businesses that I'm involved in center around that particular strength and skill set and passion. So right now I do 4 things in life that pay the bills, with some paying the bills more than others. The first thing that I call the pay the rent business is I do executive search in the K-12 education nonprofit sector. I work for a national boutique search firm where we place education and nonprofit leaders across the country, and have been doing that on a full-time basis for the past 6 months, but I had been consulting with them for about 4.5 years, and I was solopreneuring and doing my own work and working with other search firms. The second business that I have is life and career coaching. So the executive search and the career coaching fit well together, because a lot of candidates I often talk to for jobs become career coaching clients, because often many of the people that I'm talking to executive search aren't always fits for the jobs that I am placing people for, but could be fits for the jobs that I may know about, or people that are looking for things in my network. And so I help people all the way through from networking and exploring their career to interviewing skills to negotiating their salary when an offer is made. So anything revolving around getting hired by a company, I can career coach someone on. Mostly in the ed and nonprofit sector, but I've coached people in finance and entertainment, amongst other sectors. 2 other things I do are more labors of love. They don't pay the rent by any stretch of the imagination, but I love doing them, and they provide different levels of joy in my life. So I do men's personal styling. I do styling for a luxury menswear company called J. Hilburn, where we ensure that men have great tailored clothing to fit their style and their bodies. And so I've been doing that for about nearly 5 years. And so I just believe that, when men are well dressed for whatever endeavor that they have, that could be an interview, it could be a wedding, it could be hanging out on a Saturday night with their partner, that a well-dressed man oozes confidence. And I think there's nothing more important for me to share with men than how to dress better to be more confident. The last thing I do is teach group fitness classes. And so that's even a huger labor of love, because I'm very passionate about working out, my own fitness and wellness. And so I teach group fitness classes on the weekend at a Versa Climber studio in downtown Jersey City called Crag. And we do 40 to 50 minute high intensity interval training classes using the Versa Climber as our cardio tool. And when we're not on the Versa Climber, there are exercises people can do between different calisthenics and dumbbell weight bearing exercises. So, similar to my passion for men's personal styling, I have found that getting people in good shape is a passion because when you're in better shape, you see and experience the world differently. I would love for people to just live the longest, most sustainable, joyful lives that they can. So, centered around all of that, I can't reach people with content or my advice if I don't build relationships with them at all. And so, the cultivating and building relationships with others is core to all of my businesses because even if I am a genius at any of the four things that I do, it won't matter if I can't reach the person who's on the other side of that. And so building relationships is something I take very seriously. It's something that I talk a lot about professionally through the world of networking, but also just, how do people become curious about other people in a way that's authentic and gets people to feel like they're being listened to.
There's so much to go into here. Without betraying when we were in school together, this wasn't the first part of your career here, right? You've done some things before that.
Yeah, I was a career changer twice. Yep.
Tell me what that was like, changing careers.
So I think, like a lot of us, when we went to college together, Gregory, I thought that I wanted to go to school with what I majored in, right? It was pre-med. I was a neuroscience major. I thought that going to medical school was just destiny from everything I had learned from kindergarten through senior year in college. What I realized is around like late junior year, senior year is that I wasn't really sure I wanted to be a doctor because it was something that was thrust upon me rather than something that I fundamentally was passionate about, right? And so I ended up taking a year off. I took the MCAT, did well, but decided that going to medical school wasn't for me. So I ended up working at NYU for a couple of years, staying connected to university and not really wanting to grow up. And then towards the end of the dot-com era in the early 2000s, my sister got me a job at Morgan Stanley. So I worked in finance for 3 years, which is not something I ever would have expected. But Morgan Stanley is a blue chip name, well respected in the space, even 20 years later. And while I did good work there, once again, this theme of not being passionate about it really came up big for me, even though I was doing good work in different kinds of finance endeavors in my 3 years there. Now I rewind because what I was really passionate about, starting back in college especially, was this idea of social justice and giving back. And so I had known about Teach for America for a while through friends of mine who did that work at NYU and recruited people at NYU and folks who became teachers through Teach for America. And so I ended up working in their national office back in summer of 2003 as my first job in the education nonprofit sector. And I haven't looked back since because I found a calling in terms of working for something that I believe was core to what allowed me as a child of Philippine immigrants to have an equalizer in my life that allowed me, just to tout stats, right, as someone who was a Pell Grant recipient, but is now, even though I don't think this is a lot of money, but it's a lot of money, I think, in this country towards the average, right? Like in the top 15% of income makers in this country, right? And it's not something to take lightly. That happened for me in a single generation, right? Education got me there, right? And so I think a lot of the lessons I've learned in these 15 years is like, what can I do at an individual level to help people land jobs and supporting people through jobs to do that work, but also more importantly is thinking about things from the systemic level. How are politics at play? How is money at play? How does systemic racism get in play in terms of like how policies and laws and money flows around in our education sector and the nonprofit sector? So I meandered through a couple of different things, but I think I needed to go through that journey because honestly, I don't think out of college I would have fallen in love in education in the same way as I did 6-7 years after meandering through two different careers.
So the people that you're helping find positions within the nonprofit education space, are they similarly coming from backgrounds that are non-traditional, or are you working with people who are more on that trajectory for a while?
It's probably more the latter, right? I think I certainly run into people who want to make transitions from, you know, something outside of the nonprofit or education sector and into that sector, that's probably like 10 to 15% of people I talk to max. Most of the people I talk to have been working in some combination of working K-12 education that's working directly in schools, or some nonprofit that might directly support schools, or some nonprofit that's doing some kind of good in the community. Although I'm a career changer now that I've worked in this sector for 15 years, I think most people don't remember until I tell them, or I remind them, like, yeah, my first two jobs out of college had nothing to do with working in the education or nonprofit sector. So it's something really early in my career. So I think I understand what it's like to still help someone move to another sector. But, I have a lot of insight on how to navigate the education and nonprofit sectors that comes from just having been in it for the last 15 years.
So a lot of my listeners are probably at that stage in their life where you were when you were switching into working for Teach for America, the sort of mid-20s, having had a few different jobs under their belt, maybe a career that they're looking to move past and into something new. What advice do you have for people who are in a career transition?
Yeah, really good question. When I coach people on how to think about a career transition, it comes back to doing some asset mapping, right? What are you bringing to the table, right? So what are you good at, your strengths? What are you not good at, or what you don't like doing, or what are you passionate about? For me, those are like the 4 starter questions that I've learned talking to various other career coaches in my last 15 years. That those are just fundamental questions I ask people when they're in transition and they're not sure what they want to do. Now, I certainly talk to people who know what they want to do, but when people are making a career transition, they're like, hey, I've worked in a sector that I don't think I want to stay in anymore, and I'm curious about going to other sectors. I often go back to that. And I think those questions are fundamental to answer, because I have found many of us tend to be really linear in our approach, right? So it's like, hey, I'm really good at project management, so I'm going to do other project management roles in other careers, right?
Yeah, I tried
But
that.
I have found project managers, right, have other strengths that allow them to be good project managers. They're very detail oriented, right? They might be someone who is good at facilitating meetings, right? There's a number of other strengths that are important to pull out for each of us at any point in our lives when we're thinking about what's next, that especially for someone making a career transition, you have to bring and elevate. And then what I often think about is making that career transition is talking to people in the sectors you're interested in, so you can start to figure out how do you translate your skill set and experiences to that sector. It's almost like you're learning a new foreign language, right? So, if someone is going from education to finance, well, how do you translate that skill set, right? I've been a classroom teacher. Well, wait a second. If I've been a good classroom teacher, I have been someone who plans well. I'm someone that may have had experience also working with adults, so I can collaborate well with others and, can lead meetings, right? Probably similar thing. You might not have the technical skills in finance, right? You might have to go back to school to get those things. Maybe in an ideal world, you had a bachelor's in finance and decided not to pursue that right out of undergrad, right? So some of it is just having someone understand from other people that are doing the work in the sector or sectors that they're interested in. Let me tell you a little bit about what I do. What do you do? How did you get into what you do? What advice would you have for me? Because I think the stark reality, Gregory, is that when someone's making a career transition to another sector, it is 98% of who you know. I would argue it's probably more, right? I give the 2% because every once in a while, right, you can get a job, or you may not know as many people, and through the strength of your persistence, how you look on paper, and how well you interview, you get a job. That is so few people in my executive search. It's hard for me to think about how many people that is versus the number of searches that I've touched, right? I tell people like brass tacks, look on LinkedIn. What are the companies you're interested in? Look at people by those sectors that you're connected to. If they're first degree connections, how well do you know them? How do you approach them, right? Do you send them a message on LinkedIn? Do you even check LinkedIn? Do you have their email? Do you have their phone number? Do you have their Facebook? Because some of it is, if the reliance is on relying on your network, especially the people, and I use this in very emotional terms, people that love and care about you and your work and your life, That's your starting point. Anytime you're looking for something, you could be looking for a chiropractor. I would give the same advice. Like, Gregory, who are the people you love and care and trust that you can ask for a good chiropractor recommendation? You're like, oh, let me think about that. Or who are people that you've known that have had chiropractor adjustments? Or what I often do is I crowdsource that on LinkedIn or Facebook. You'd be surprised at how people love to recommend good people that have been giving them good services, right? And so that's the big skill set that I think I started in college when you and I first met, Gregory, that is translated through every single job in my life. Is that because I've built relationships with people, whenever I've had to activate the goodwill and advice and connections of people, I've been able to do that fast and with a lot of generosity. That's how people make career transitions, right? There's a lot of other nuance to it, but without that foundation, it gets really hard to make a career transition. The timeline gets longer, right? And that has nothing to do with someone's talent. There are lots of talented people who want to make career transitions, but if they don't spend the time thinking about how to actively cultivate their relationships and having people know the good work that they're doing, it just gets a lot harder, because the people that hustle and do those things more consistently, I have found, always get better jobs and have more job opportunities.
Do you have advice for people who really need to bootstrap that relationship building, right? Like, you've been in the New York area for, well, ever, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'm working with student populations, listeners of this show. They may have relocated to the Seattle area. They need to build that network and build those relationships quickly. Do you have advice that you'd give to people in that situation?
Yeah, it's some combination of like the virtual world and the in-person world, right? Leveraging your LinkedIn and Facebook, right? And so I have found these days, LinkedIn has changed over the last 5 years. It's actually become a lot more social. And so, connecting one with people that you don't even know is a lot more common. And it's even easier if you connect with people like, at the college you work at, Gregory, for your students to say, let me reach out to other alums here in Seattle. I'm just going to connect with them on LinkedIn. Or maybe there's a LinkedIn group of those alums. Or if someone wants to be really entrepreneurial, right? Maybe I become the MBA student who forms the LinkedIn group for our class, right? So we all gravitate there. We all help each other. Now, why do I say that as a strategy? Because I found being in the know and being someone who gives and connects means that you're given an awful lot oftentimes, because you're in the know. People put all kinds of things in front of you. You find out about different things. And if you one of my favorite books of all time around like networking is Adam Grant's Give and Take. I would say your MBA students, like, that's required reading, I think, for any B student, is reading that book, right? Because it shows that if you network authentically, you build relationships authentically, which can be done in the world of LinkedIn, sending someone a nice note about why you want to connect and what interests you about them, asking for a phone call, asking for coffee, right? And the same thing for in person. What are the different groups out there, whether it's a club, whether it's an industry event, whether it's a Seattle like professional event, right? For, an MBA student to go out and go meet people, right? And then meeting people at an event where you don't know anybody, there's strategy even beyond that. Like, when I've coached people to do that, like, there's some really easy ways to meet people. When you're filling out your name tag, which is almost inevitable because most of these things, they don't have a printed out name tag. You have to write it. Go hand the name tag to the person behind you and say, oh, here's a name tag. You're filling it out. Oh, my name is Gregory. Your name is? Works like a charm. Second thing, if it's at a bar or somewhere where there's food, talk to people on the line who are eating or getting a drink. Oh, what are you about to drink? Oh, what brought you here today? Oh, my name is innocuous. What brought you here today often opens up a can of things, and you start to take a conversationally, seeing where it goes from here. What are you looking for out of here today? Is there anything I could do to help you here with that? And you'd be surprised, right? You might actually get to start to know other people through a total stranger who might be the person who's on the panel to speak at the event that you're at. I've often found when someone is bootstrapping it, right, they have to just be attentive to giving. They've got to listen to others and just be naturally curious, right? It doesn't mean you have to meet 50 people and get 50 business cards. That's a bad approach. If you meet 3 quality people at an in-person event, or you send out 5 to 10 personalized LinkedIn messages to people you really want to meet in the industry you're curious about, or people that are alums of the school that you're going to, or other affiliations that you have, and there are people in Seattle that you know. That's how you connect with people. And I think more often than not, people resonate with like, oh, wow, we have that in common. I'm going to keep reading the message. Oh, they're not asking me for my rib. Oh, they're just asking for advice. Oh, I can give them advice. Sure. I can spend 15 minutes on the phone. Sometimes I've heard 15-minute combos, Gregory, turn into 3-hour conversations with people.
Watch out. You don't know how long this interview is going to go.
Yeah, I know exactly. But I'm never surprised at people's generosity wanting to help people. And I think if you were to tell your students that, like, you should never be shocked that people want to be helpful, because they do. Yeah.
We use this book, Designing Your Life, which came out of Stanford, and based on the class there of the same name. And one of the anecdotes or the lessons that they talk about in the book, and when we run workshops on it, is you ask, have you ever been stopped and asked for directions?
Yeah.
Yes. Like, did you feel put out by giving somebody directions? No. Did you feel happy that you could be helpful? Yes. And that's what this is. It's about asking for directions sometimes, directions for your career. But I love what you said about being generous and looking for ways that you can help other people, that person in the line behind you, or even that person you're having the coffee chat with, right? Mm-hmm. Ways that you can contribute that ultimately will strengthen that relationship. I think that's a fantastic lesson.
Yeah, it's, it feels counterintuitive, because I think the dirty part of what people consider networking is that it feels transactional. Like, what am I, as someone who's on the younger side, going to be able to offer someone who's older or has the job that I want or works at the place that I want, right? I think you flip it on its head. The advice I often give to people is, how do you unlock the natural propensity of everyone to be generous? That happens in a lot of different ways. Something in common, you just listening and sitting back, you offering to, like, grab the name tag that person was going to fill out and handing it to them. Or, oh, here's a plate. We're online getting food. Oh, here's a plate and a napkin and utensils. Thank you so much. That's so kind of you. Oh, I'm Ron, by the way. What brings you here to this event? You'd often be surprised at how much that gets the layers of, like, someone's maybe built up walls to be like, oh, because what's processing in that person's head? Oh, Ron is really nice. He's doing those things. I'm going to be more apt to listen to what he has to say and what he has to offer. So I often think of, like, what all those little things, like, it's like holding a door for someone too, right? There's all these little things at in-person moments, in virtual moments. All of my virtual emails are almost the same, Gregory. I offer to help. I don't sell anybody a thing. I say, I'm willing to talk to anybody for 15 minutes if you want to get on the phone with me, irrespective of where you work in this country or the world. I'll get on the phone with you, right? And it leads to just getting to know people, right? And being curious. And I find that those dividends often pay itself forward, so that when you're looking, people are just going to be, I find, inordinately generous with you.
Yeah, I think it's so true. People will remember that. People remember people who helped them and who have been generous, whether it's with their time or their advice. An angle that I take a lot of times is, say, if I have a conversation with someone at an event, and then in the days or weeks afterwards, I see some article that touches upon what we talked about, or hear a podcast episode that I think they would be interested in, I'll pass that along to them and I'll say, oh, I remember we were talking about this and I just read this amazing article. You might not have seen it, or you might have, but I figured I would share it. And that can open up channels of communication and strengthen those connections.
Yeah.
And it takes so little time.
It doesn't, I mean, this is where I think one of the beauties of social media is that I think the second thing that I think you probably help your B school students too, that I imagine Designing Your Life talks about is, I mean, another, I think, potentially dirty word of branding yourself, right? Because branding sounds like, well, I'm a person, I'm not a business, but 2019 is different than 2009 is different than 1999, right? In terms of, like, how you get your message out and how you get people to reach out to you. And the beauty of social media that I've seen, and I think people who are younger, like that mid-20s, they grew up through social media. And so doing things like creating videos of yourself and talking about where you're doing well and not doing well and marketing yourself, I think comes a lot more intuitively to folks who are in their mid 20s than those like you and I, Greg, who are X age. I'm not going to say that age, right? And so, when you captivate social media so people just know what you're thinking, they know what you're looking for, they know what you're about, and then you're generous with people because you connect with people. Someone is like, how do you figure out the LinkedIn and Facebook algorithm? You share content, you like things, you comment, you connect with people, and then you actually connect with real people. You don't just connect with people solely through those platforms. You get to go on the phone with people. Occasionally you have coffee with people in person. You do Zooms with people, right? If you can't connect with them and they prefer to see a face, right? There are all kinds of ways to really authentically build relationships where that builds your brand, right? Because then it's like, oh, Gregory is that person who does this. Ron is that person who does that and looks for these things, right? Because all I want when I talk to people is for them to think about Ron is always looking for talented people to talk to. We're looking for jobs in the education nonprofit sector, or clients who want to hire those kinds of people, and Ron and his search firm can lead a process to get those people. That's it. I mean, there are other things. That's not the totality of like my brand, right? But I think when it comes to like paying the rent, that's what I want people to think, right? Because everything else starts to cascade from that, right? And so, well, how do you then build your brand through social media and the work that you do both virtually and in person so people see you as that?
That's great. So let's talk about the search firm and what you do. I'm interested to know, in this space of education nonprofits, what are some of the top skills that organizations are looking for right now?
Ooh.
Like, what sets a candidate apart?
Yeah, this is, I think, at large observation, right? When you're applying to a nonprofit job anywhere in America, your excitement and personal professional connection to the mission matters a lot. And so if you're applying for a job at ASPCA or a organization that's tackling homelessness or a organization that's tackling domestic violence, or an organization that works in a particular community that supports a particular group of people, right? Someone understanding that mission and what resonates with them about it is probably it's easily the first piece of advice I would give, right? Because then everything else becomes, what does the job description look like? And what are the technical specs that someone's looking for, right? I think some of the set apart skill sets, I don't want to, because technical skill sets are technical skill sets. I think those things are oftentimes a lot more easily learned, but I would say the leadership, or I don't like the word soft skill sets because it connotates like they're smushy and not important when I think they're probably 80.
Yeah, probably more. Yeah.
Is how you collaborate with others, right? And so when I think about what B school students are put through with the group projects, which seems to probably be every assignment that they have in an MBA 2-year program, is what role do you like to take? What roles can you play? How well do you get the group to work well together? If you use a sports analogy, right? It doesn't matter in basketball at some level how many points you're dropping and how many assists, right? It's really like the metric in basketball is when you're on the court, what's the plus or minus ratio of like how well your team is doing in terms of points? Is your team like a plus 25 when you're on the court, or is it a minus 20? Some of that correlates with your output, but some of that also correlates with mistakes and other things you're doing, or how well you're not building the culture of a team, right? And so I often think, and this is probably every sector, but I think the nonprofit sector does have a reputation at large of being one where people like to collaborate on things. Things can at times move a little bit slower than in other sectors, right? I think folks understanding you've got to be able to know how to come together with other people and move people towards a common goal, whether that's through project management, that's a technical skill set, whether that's knowing how to facilitate a meeting, whether that's knowing how to strategic plan. Those are like 3 skill sets I think all become really important skills if someone eventually wants to start leading people.
And I think you're right that it goes beyond just the nonprofit sector or the education sector. I mean, these are skills that I think every sector is looking for. And that first piece, the passion and energy for the mission of the organization or the mission of the company, if you don't demonstrate that in an interview setting, you're going to have an uphill battle the rest of the way.
Yeah, and the advice I often have for folks is like, you read over the website, right? That's always the first thing. You read over as much material as you can get. Think about it like you're a researcher. You look through Glassdoor. I mean, you Google the company's name, you see what pops up. Of course, their website. Look at their Facebook page. Look at their LinkedIn company page. See if you can get to talk to people that work there in your network, right? That becomes probably the other 70-80% of like figuring out whether a company and a role is the right fit for anybody, no matter what spectrum you are in life. I think too many people take roles because they see a role, they see what they perceive a reputation of an organization is, and it may be a stellar organization, but I've seen different metrics on this, like whether it's 50% or like as high as 65, 70%. Most of an employee's satisfaction at a job in any sector is their manager, right? You really got to get to know, no matter what sector you're applying for, who is your manager? How do they support people? What do other people around that manager say about that person, right? And it's totally possible, I think, in this less hierarchical society where you can get that information if you broker your network, right? To ask around about that person, that organization, you can get a lot of what I call the hidden information network about a company and about a team and about a person. I'm actually shocked people don't use that, because when I do search work, that's probably 85% of what I do, is trying to figure out who is that person? What are they about? Whether through formal interviews, asking around, right? Because people will talk, and people will talk when they really enjoy someone. And you'd be surprised at like how little people will say, or at times when you build a relationship the right way, what people will say about you. And so I think people have to be cognizant of that, right? It's almost like, it's the no a-holes rule that I think that someone's written a book about that, which makes me giggle, right? But at some level, like the way you treat people gets around. And when you actually ask people, like people are actually willing to talk about it when asked in the right way, right? And so sometimes people like, we still have it as a society where it's, look, those that produce oftentimes are the ones who get elevated. But at some level, you think about this with Hollywood, right? You think about someone like a Russell Crowe. Not exactly the nicest reputation in Hollywood. Inordinately talented, let's be clear. An amazing actor. But not someone consistently again and again has been talked about, not the easiest person to work with. I don't know how many Russell Crowe movies I've seen in the last 5 years, but it hasn't been a lot. Right. I don't know if that's because he's wanted to like dial back, but these things start to, that you hear on the other side, like someone I've heard has a stellar reputation of being like people loving to work with him is Don Cheadle. Don Cheadle does a lot of work. And so that's the same thing, like for anybody who's working at these, looking to get a job out of B school and then continue their career, is it's a disservice if you don't understand how people, what they say about you. It's actually really important to know, not just from a managing your image and your brand, which is a little bit of it, but it's really about, what am I learning from that? Am I really leading the way I think I'm leading? Am I working the way? Yeah, and I'm almost surprised at how many people don't, because it's hard to look in that mirror. And I will tell you, Gregory, like I didn't do that right out of college. It took me probably working at Teach for America was the first job I had. Was like, oh wow, I'm being explicitly told to look at the mirror about who I am. My other two jobs didn't do that at all.
Yeah, it's one of the benefits, I think, of the MBA experience is there are a lot of opportunities to build that self-awareness and to solicit feedback from the teams that you work on. And you get to work on new teams here at Foster every quarter, and sometimes beyond that, because you'll work on projects outside of the core curriculum. So it's a great opportunity to build that self-awareness. And I think that the students who take the most advantage of it have the most growth during the program. I want to get to fashion and styling before we finish here, and I want to be respectful of your time. So obviously there's a difference between New York and Seattle. It took me a while to figure that out, both in how fast I was speaking, the quality of bagels and pizza, but also style. But I'm wondering if there are some universal style guidelines that you bring up with clients when you're working with them. Like, what should men be thinking about as they're thinking about style that they are going to dress themselves with as they move about in the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality, so much has changed between like 1999 or even 2009, styling norms for a workplace, right? Because the workplace, what I'm guessing, especially in Seattle, just like it is in the Bay Area or even parts of LA, most of LA, is a lot more, not even just business casual, but like cool casual, right?
Yeah.
Where a blazer is even too much, right? It's probably just a really nice shirt, could be even a funky shirt and a nice pair of like dressy jeans, right? And some shoes or maybe even a pair of sneakers, right? I mean, the first piece of advice I always give to anybody is like, see how other people are dressing in the workplace. So some of it is just asking. It sounds really like, duh, of course you'd ask, right? But like, you'd be surprised. Like, I think it's worth asking, like, what's the difference between working at tech and there are variations of tech, a startup versus a more established tech firm, right? Because I don't want to assume that every single like tech firm is all casual, right? Maybe it is. I don't know, right? I'm guessing it is, right? But there might be some exceptions, right? You know, maybe there's a difference between working in Intel versus Microsoft versus Google or Apple, right? There's probably some slight variation, perhaps. But there's differences if you're going to finance, a hedge fund, an investment bank. There's probably differences if you're going to more of a startup or a consulting firm, right? And so I think some of it is figuring out like what are the norms. And I think the reality is within those norms is it, you know, you probably, Gregory, supply photos of like what does business casual look like? What is like, you know, something even less casual in the business casual look like, all right? Something that's just fully casual to like, you know, something that's more like, you know, traditional corporate dress, right?
Absolutely. And we often tell people, you know, take a look at LinkedIn at the people who work at the company that you're interviewing for or that you're going to work for and see how they're presenting themselves on LinkedIn in those photos can give you an idea. Or when they come onto campus for information sessions or even for conducting the interviews, it's an opportunity to see how people are dressing and understand what that style culture is at the organization.
Because I think, you know, at the end of I think this is where, you know, when I follow men's fashion, right, you know, I think we as men in America have tended to have less options in terms of how you dress at a workplace, right? There hasn't been a suit or what I call the business casual, you know, outfit, dress shirt, polo, and khakis, which I find inordinately boring, right? Because I go to Midtown Manhattan, New York City, and see guys coming out for lunch. It looks like an army of the same guy.
Right.
It's like, if it's spring, polo, brown belt or black belt, black shoes, brown shoes, khakis. Maybe it's a different khaki color than like the normal, like stone khaki color. Maybe it's like a darker khaki color. Rarely do I see, maybe it's a blue, navy blue. Rarely do, or gray. If I go outside of that, that's abnormal, right? And so I think the question is like, once you come up with what the composite is, dependent on how you see other, like where can you start? And I'm speaking solely for men because that's more what I'm attuned for and what I do on the side is where can you express your style in a way that's not going to have people look at you weird, right? Because at the end of it all, I don't agree with the sentiment, but unfortunately at times, how you dress is how people perceive the quality of work you're going to do. And it's detail orientation. I don't think those things are true, mind you, but I think that's something that's in a lot of people's heads, whether consciously or unconsciously, right?
Well,
So
it's thin slicing, right? It's
right.
looking for any clues as to, you know, they can give us an edge on understanding the person that's in front of us.
Yeah. You know, so someone's wearing a suit where the pants are a little too droopy, right? Does that mean that person's not going to care about the details of the PowerPoint presentation they're going to have to make? Oh, if someone's blazer doesn't fit them well enough and like the shoulders are too big or the sleeves are a slight bit too long, do I think that that person is going to have the kind of care in working with clients that I would? I don't know if those things necessarily equate to that, but I've heard those things in people's heads because they've articulated it during interviews, right? When I've interviewed, when I debrief at hire managers and teams, right? So past all that, right, I think, you know, I think the nuance of what excites me about, you know, how you can dress in the workplace is like, how do you express your style with like totally breaking out the norm of like the template, right? It could be, you know what, I might wear a slightly different color. Like for me, I have the rainbow of colors in my closet, right? I like to wear pink. Easter was a perfect day, Easter Sunday, for me to wear my pink dress shirt, right? It goes with the theme of the season, right? Yeah. You know, but some of it is also understanding, you know, I mean, this is also getting nuance, right? This is something I learned. Your skin tone often dictates what kind of colors you should wear to, what complements your skin tone. Someone who's really astute to that is a really good stylist. Like some people just like, I'm going to put stuff on you. Like, oh, no, you got to like, If you have a darker skin tone or lighter skin tone, depending on what hues of colors you have, certain colors look better than not on a person, right? And so, if you're a darker skin hue, like brighter colors often work really well. I can't say that brighter colors work often the time if you have lighter color skin, right? It can, but you have to like think about how you're going to mix and play your wardrobe. Because I think the worst thing you want is to like almost look like you're the same color throughout, right?
Right.
You always want to flash up some differentiation of color in your wardrobe. It's just a matter of personal expression and understanding what do you want to contrast and what do you want to like dim down.
It seems that every time I open up social media today or any day, there's a new direct-to-consumer shirt company or sock company or trouser company or suit company. Are there some companies out there that you think are doing really great work, putting together really great clothes and outfits at a great value that you recommend to folks?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said that Jay Hilburn wasn't a good one, right? Especially we started a new line of dress shirts and suits that were made with the younger man in mind. It's just called Hilburn, all lowercase, right? And so you get less options in terms of what you could do with suits, right? And so it's not fully made to measure. There's some limitations in terms of like the different personalizations you can make on a suit and a shirt, but it's at a much lower price point. I think the suits probably start at like $450 versus like I think on average our suits are $750, right? So they're good options there, right? When you're looking for a relatively high quality suit that's not going to like break your budget. When I think about finding a good suit anywhere, right? You want to figure out price, quality, and fit. Fit really matters. I would say even a suit that isn't of the highest quality, if it's tailored well for how you want it to fit your body, you're going to look like $1,000,000 no matter if the suit has all these things. I'm not going to bore you the details of like, for the chest in the suit, like they actually like glue it versus it being stitched, right? Like the normal everyday guy is not going to know that difference. I'm going to know it because I see how it sits on a person's like body. I'm like, oh yeah, that doesn't look like a suit that's made with like the attention of like a master tailor. Most people are not going to even know the difference, right?
Prioritize fit over fabric or quality.
So I would say that any person who really cares about how their clothes fit, you have to find a good tailor in your area. Or you happen to get a service. Some guys like me, like, go to a service where I'm like, I know the clothes are going to be made close to, if not perfectly, for the way I want the clothes to fit my body, right? But that usually costs you a little bit more. And that may be out of some guy's price range, right? There's nothing wrong with like getting a good enough suit and then finding a good tailor, because I'm sure there's probably recommendations of tailors that go around.
You could go on LinkedIn or Facebook and you can ask your network for recommendations of tailors.
Right. And you don't have to spend oodles of money. Like you just need a couple of like really good pieces of clothing, especially for like when you want to present well, that fit your body well. I think any guy, if I were to like dumb down like a capsule wardrobe for like any man in America, I'm like, look, you need a good pair of jeans. You need probably 2 or 3 good dress shirts, a couple of good nice casual shirts, and then most 2 suits. And if I were to pick your colors, it's blue and gray. Those are interchangeable colors.
Yeah.
A white dress shirt, maybe a different color dress shirt, right? You don't need a lot.
I think it's good advice. Find a brand of shirts that fits you well and get them in a couple colors or a couple complementary colors so that they go with whatever you're wearing on the bottom.
Yeah. Because the reality is when I've worked with the spectrum of men on how they want to dress, honestly, some men, they understand the importance of it, but they don't care about putting in the work. They would just rather have a man like me who can style them say, here are some choices for you. Do you like this? Yes or no? Based on what you've told me, go ahead, order it. I'm just going to put it on. Like, it's just not, something they want to spend too much brain power about, right? Yeah. I would say that's actually a large amount of men, right? I think there's, probably a smaller amount of men, at least I mean, some of this is probably by area too, but if I'm thinking like the New York area, right, where there's somewhere around at max 25% of men who like have attentive detail around these things. Like for me, I care about how close my pants are to my ankle. I want to show a little bit of sock. I care about how close, when I'm wearing a blazer, the suit jacket, especially on my forearm suits, I don't want it to be too baggy, right? If it is, I'm going to get it taken in, right? Which is not a detail a lot of guys often care about, right? When they're looking at these things. Most guys just want to be told, hey, here's some basic colors. I just wanted to fit good enough so that when I get compliments on it, I'm like, oh, that feels good because I think I'm getting compliments. Right.
Everybody loves to get a compliment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which maybe goes back to earlier about being generous. Hold the door, give someone a compliment, can help break down some of those barriers that we walk around with, right? Prime people to make deeper connections.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So as we finish up here, I'm wondering if there are any books, magazines, newspaper articles, podcasts that come to mind that you think anyone seeking a job right now, thinking about a career transition or not a transition, that you recommend, places that you go to regularly to find information about these topics?
Someone I think who gives a lot of really good targeted advice, who once used to work in industry but now has built her own HR consulting shop, and you can follow her on LinkedIn, is Liz Ryan. I think she says a lot of really astute, hands-on things for people working in industry who are doing the work like me, but also for candidates to think about what's in the mindset of talent folks, HR folks, and overcoming some of those barriers and challenges, right? A second person, Seth Godin, is one of my favorite people to follow. His Akimbo podcast. While not always directly about getting a job, I think there's a lot of like really good advice once you're in a job or like thinking about your leadership. Greg, you and I are doing one of his fellowships. There's some good stuff there. Folks want to do, continuing education amongst many different things, right? I think there's a lot he's offering in his, learning empire that could be good for your students. The third person, we mentioned him earlier, is probably my favorite of the three, although I think the other two are strong favorites too, is Adam Grant's books, Give and Take, his work-life podcast, which I think is just full of really good stuff. And I think he has a free monthly newsletter. He said, I think it's called Granted. That's really cool. And there's actually a giving circle, which I joined, but I haven't been as active on. But if people want to flex their muscle of like giving, like on an actual site that Adam Grant's created for other people, I forget what it's called, but
we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out and put it in the show notes along with these other names and links to their websites. I think I'm a big fan of Adam Grant's even Work in 60 Seconds, which he posts on LinkedIn, often has good nuggets, and the Work-Life podcast is also great as well. So I want to thank you so much, Ron, for taking the time to speak with me today. It was great to catch up, hear about what you're doing, some of the philosophy behind it and what drives you. And I hope that we will continue to be in touch.
Thanks, Gregory. I really appreciate you making the time to have me on this podcast. I am excited to stay in touch, and I offer to any of your students, if I can be of any value to them, I'm always happy to have a 15-minute convo with any of your current students or alumni.
Great. And I'll put your contact information, not like your phone number and email, but the ways to reach out to you on LinkedIn, for example, in the show notes as well.
Absolutely.
I really like Ron's thoughts on generosity and networking. A few years back, I came across an article he wrote called The Tao of Networking, which shares 3 important lessons. Networking is giving, networking is learning, and networking is consistency. Find a link to the article in the show notes, along with links to J. Hilborn Clothes, Seth Godin's Akimbo podcast, Adam Grant's podcasts and book, Give and Take, and Ron's website, ronrapatalo.com, where you can learn more about him. If this is the first time you've listened to the show, 2 other episodes you might be interested in are my interviews with style strategist Audrey Bolak and mentor and executive coach Suzanne Kiel-Ekman. Find them wherever you found this podcast. Thank you for listening to another episode of Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. I'd love to hear what you think about the podcast. You can email me at gheller@uw.edu. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or classmate.